Well, hello, friends. It's Monday. I hope your week is starting off well. I know I enjoyed starting the week off with you together in worship yesterday, getting into the Word and celebrating who Jesus is through the song of the angels. Now we're going to turn our attention back to Revelation, and we're in chapter 8, and we're beginning to see the intensification of God's judgment against sin and to some degree the earth, because that's where sin resides at that point. So pick up with me in verse 1. Let's read verses 1 and 2, and let's talk about it a little bit. When he opened the seventh seal, there was a silence in heaven for about half an hour. Then I saw the seven angels who stand in the presence of God. Seven trumpets were given to them. I know it sounds abrupt, but let's pause there for just a moment. So here we see the seventh seal. Remember earlier on we had the Ancient of Days handing to the Lamb the scroll, and we talked about how some believe that to be kind of like the property deed, if you will, to the earth. It had seven seals on it. And we can see that in terms of a full, complete number or whatever, but now we see that six of those seals have been broken. There are aspects of judgment that were associated with that. Four of those, and so now we see that seventh seal broken, and it's fascinating because it says that there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now, what's fascinating about that is that up to this point, there's been nothing but celebration and rejoicing in heaven. John has recorded time and time again during his heavenly vision that, hey, this group was praising God. The elders, this group, the seraphim who surround the throne, they don't ever stop. Holy, holy, holy. All the praise and worship that's going on was a constant. And not to mention the fact that if you go back to chapter 7, in verse 12, it talks about how the redeemed saints, those who have come out of the great tribulation, they're crying out blessing and glory and wisdom and honor, along with the angels and the creatures. I mean, it's just a gigantic celebration of who God is, constantly going on, even through those seals being undone. But when the seventh seal is undone, silence. And John says for about half an hour, which is intriguing because he's in heaven. Heaven doesn't have a timeline, but John still has a conscious awareness of that. So what's going on here? Well, there's a little bit of discussion as to what was taking place, but some see this as the demonstration of the intensification of the judgment. The fact that God's wrath is being aroused even more as we move through this. Because remember, we started with the seal judgments. We'll go to the trumpet judgments next. Then we'll go to the bowl judgments. Each one of those takes on a more intense application, as you'll see as you read through chapter 8, specifically talking about the trumpets. So here we see silence. And some say, well, what was happening is they were seeing the judgments. Now that the seal was broken and the scroll was open, they're looking at God's predetermined judgments against sin and against the earth because of sin. And that might well be the case. And people are just, those who are viewing it are just kind of in awe of what God's about to do. Well, there's a special group present that's identified as the seven angels who stand in the presence of God. That's what some people refer to them as the presence angels. There's some extra biblical material. It's Jewish in nature that was written that identifies these seven. Some unique names, all of them ending with the L. Two of them we're familiar with. One of them is Michael. One of them is Gabriel. And in fact, Gabriel identifies himself in just such a way. We're talking about in the Christmas narrative, he appears to Zechariah. And Zechariah is like, well, how can this be? I'm old, Elizabeth's old. Remember, I Gabriel, who stand in the presence of God. So he's identified as one of these presence angels. But clearly these are special. It says they're the angels. There are seven of them identified. There may be more, but at this point, there's only seven. Again, the number may be the idea of a complete group. Regardless, they have a special place, not just in terms of where they're at, but in terms of what they do. Because the Bible says they were handed seven trumpets, or they were given seven trumpets. So that's interesting because the trumpet in the Old Testament was often used for different functions within the context of Israel. They were used to call assemblies. They were used to call the people to festivities, to initiate a festival celebration. They were used to call the people to military action. When we fast forward to the New Testament and you think about like 1 Corinthians 15, I think it's 62 or something like that. The trump of the Lord will sound, the dead in Christ will rise. The trumpet signifies the day of the Lord coming. And so the trumpet was always used to symbolize, sometimes it was to call to, sometimes it was to precede something, but it symbolized something special, something unique. And certainly that would be the case here, because each of the trumpets will represent a unique judgment unleashed by God against the earth, and it's going to come in thirds. Four of the judgments are going to be what we call, you might call ecological, meaning they're directly against nature. And then two of those judgments are going to come in the form of unleashing a demonic force, releasing the demons to act. And of course, the seventh will initiate the bowl judgments. But the next one is one that intrigues me. It says, another angel with a golden incense burner came and stood at the altar. He was given a large amount of incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar in front of the throne. The smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints went up in the presence of God from the angel's hand. The angel took the incense burner, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it to the earth. There's peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So here we have the combination of two things. First of all, it says, verse 5, that he filled it with the incense, or with the fire from the altar. He also pointed out early on that the incense was the prayer of the saints. What prayer is that? Well, some associate that with, back in, I think, chapter 5 it is, John saw some souls under the throne. Those were the tribulation saints, saying that, hey, these cry out, how long, O Lord, will you delay? When are you going to bring judgment? And they were soothed and said, hey, be patient, it's coming. So some believe that these prayers would have been the prayers for judgment. Some believe these would have been the prayers for God to be glorified and for Christ to initiate his final return. And all those could be possible, could well be true. But here's the thing, the idea of the peals of thunder, rumbling, flash of lightning, earthquake, if you know the Exodus story where God comes down the mountain, all of that was present in his visit to his people that day. The mountain was quaking, there was thunder, there was lightning, there were peals, all that was going on when God's presence came down on the mountain that day. So some see this as God unleashing a more intense awareness of his presence in the form of judgment on the earth at that point. Whatever the case may be, clearly the process is intensifying in terms of judgment that's coming. And it's a reminder to us that although we may face so much right now in the current context of what's going on in the world today, it pales in comparison to what is indeed coming. And it is a reminder that we should serve with urgency. The urgency of knowing that whatever may be dealt with right now, or whatever people are going through right now, it's going to get worse. And we have the only answer to every problem. And that's the gospel. That's the good news. Because Jesus, here we are celebrating Christmas. Jesus was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life. He died not because he deserved it, but he died by submitting himself to that place. His death then unleashed his perfect blood. He was raised on the third day because there was no sin in him, so the power of sin could not hold him. And those who place their faith in him will indeed have his salvation. That's the good news. And that's what we are to feel the urgency to be compelled to go forward with. Yes, some of this was given to John, no doubt, as a means to encourage the saints of his day that all the persecution you're experiencing, all the hardship you're going through, God will one day bring judgment for that. And we can know that too. But also, certainly it was to give us a compelling sense of urgency to go and make disciples. And that's what we need to do. As people are right now thinking about Jesus a little more than normal because it is Christmas, they're hearing Christmas songs played on the radio that have Jesus, even though there are all these secular Christmas songs now, which are useless, by the way, pretty much, because without Christ, there is no celebration of Christmas. Then, although they're hearing these songs, and then from time to time, they're going to hear one that focuses on Jesus. So they're more open and more receptive. We need to take advantage of that. We need to be intentional with that. So I just want to encourage you, think about those areas where you live, where you learn, where you work, and where you play, and really be intentional about trying to have gospel conversations with individuals in those areas, understanding that, hey, we know the end. We know what's coming, and it may not be coming soon. We don't know that, but we do know this. It will come, and everybody inevitably will face judgment. We must be intentional with the good news. So, as I often say when we're wrapping it up, we go out with the good news because every day we're to go out living sent.